Well, I am Brent Feldman, and I am one of the partners at Matchbox Design Group. And today I would like to welcome Matt Raithel. He is the owner of Graphite Labs, a full service game development studio based out of St. Louis, Missouri. And I would like to give you a big warm welcome and an introduction, Matt.
Thanks. It's awesome to be on the podcast. It's good to get reconnected.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Good to see you. Matt and I have actually known each other for years, over 10 years, and we met each other. Yeah, definitely. Kind of when we were just starting our agencies or very early on in our career. And it's been really cool to see where, Matt, you've come with everything. And yeah, looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah, likewise. 10 years. It seems like a long time and it seems like yesterday. You probably hear that a lot.
Oh, totally. Exactly. I know when people say things like, oh, it's been 10 years, I'm like, really? That seems crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm super excited about some of the questions because actually these are things that maybe I don't actually even know myself. So some of them are going to be, really interesting for me to learn about you. So anyway, the first one is really just a baseline one of how did you get started in the industry?
Well, so I started in the industry as an artist. I mean, currently I own and operate a studio, which was never really my intention. I went to school for computer animation down in Springfield, Missouri, which was Southwest Missouri State University at the time. And I always wanted to get into video game development, but there weren't any real programs in Missouri, not very many in the Midwest that could, give me a path into the industry. I attempted computer science for about a semester. I realized very quickly that math, complicated math, was not for me. But I've always been an artist, and so going to what is now Missouri State for computer animation was kind of the first step in my journey. And when I was there, I literally was working late in the animation lab, and there was one of those flyers on the wall that, if you're my age, if you were born in the 80s, went to college in the 90s, people would have these bulletin boards and they'd sell computers and cars and look for roommates and all that kind of stuff. And there was literally a physical bulletin board with a flyer up that said, we're looking for animators to join our video game development company here in Springfield. And I looked at it and I said, well, Springfield, Missouri, like this is a very small town. There's no video game development here.
Well, Missouri, it's not the biggest hub for video games in the U.S.
I mean, it is now, of course, but back then, right. So but this voice went off in my head, and I hope that for anyone listening, sometimes this happens to you too, of like, what have I got to lose? Let's try it, right? Let's not like turn the idea off before you even give it a shot. And so sure enough, I contacted the group, and while they were new, their founders had previously done some tech software development, kind of startup style stuff, and were very successful, but didn't want to work in the kind of the boring software industry. They wanted to do something more exciting. And so games was their venture. So I connected with them. I ended up getting that position, and I started in the industry as a 3D modeler, making props for like tycoon style PC games. So if you can remember games like, goodness, Roller Coaster Tycoon and Mall Tycoon and Prison Tycoon and all the tycoon games, they needed somebody to make all the various 3D models and props and plants and, structures and buildings. And I was that guy. So that was my first job in the industry. And I started in 2004.
That's awesome. What kind of software were you using to do those 3D models back in the day?
So I was trained in a software called Lightwave. But the studio had picked up Maya, which is still very popular today. So I had to basically learn Maya, in the span of a week to really get up to speed before I started. And then for about 6 months, we used Maya before some of our contracts and partnerships demanded 3D Studio Max.
Okay.
3D Studio Max, now it's all owned by Autodesk. So essentially, 3D Studio Max is the go-to for us these days.
That's awesome. All right, and I'm curious, what is the weirdest prop you think you had been commissioned to design?
Oh, goodness. Well, that very first project, we were building a tycoon game that was all about building a nightclub, which seems like a fair idea, right? Build a nightclub, create bars, and dance floors and neon lights and all this kind of stuff. But the first object I remember actually putting into the playable game was a beer keg, which, coming out of college, right into my first job modeling beer kegs, it wasn't like I didn't have to go collect a lot of reference to make that model. But yeah, making that keg and putting that in was one of like just the greatest moments. Like, wow, I put something in a video game. That was pretty amazing.
That's super cool. That's awesome. Well, being as that you kind of like, saw a poster on the wall and started that way, and maybe other than listening to that, voice in the back of your head that says maybe I should, kind of go for that. Is there any other advice that you could kind of give people for getting into the game industry?
Sure. Well, so I've been almost in the industry, I'm 18, 19 years now, and a lot has happened just even in terms of traditional education. So even here in St. Louis, we have game development programs that are growing. I'm personally connected with a school in St. Louis called Maryville University, where I've helped them grow a game design concentration that has been built based on my experience of using, creative talent and leveraging that into making your own games. So present day, there are traditional paths of going through four-year education to get a degree in one of the many fields that contribute to games, whether it's art or programming, or even, writing and narrative techniques, production, and so forth. But what I always advise anybody that's interested is, play games, study what you like, and then go out and just start making something yourself. Tools like Unity 3D, tools like Unreal, tools like Game Maker, these are free to download, and there's a wealth of information online, videos and tutorials and other things that can help you experiment and just kind of test and see, how your ideas can kind of come to light. So, if you're not quite at that stage where, traditional, higher ed works for you, or let's say you love games and you're still in high school, you can just kind of get out on the net and go pull some of these engines down and just start experimenting just to get a taste.
That's really cool. Well, and after you've been, kind of developing games for a long time, I'm sure obviously, maybe you, I don't know if you keep a book of ideas. I don't know if it's like a show where you have like, the Bible and you look through and like, oh, we did that, or, oh, this was a good idea, but maybe we should rehash it. But is there any, way you can describe like how you approach your projects and maybe like where you draw inspiration from?
Sure. So, like many in the industry, we probably get inspiration from the games that we've loved playing, over these many years. I was born in the 80s when, Atari was around and Nintendo had been formed. So I have a pretty deep, kind of personal experience that informs, some of the different mechanics or styles of games that we like to create. But additionally, our company at Graphite Lab does do a lot of work for hire development as well, meaning companies will come to us and say, we've got this great brand. We'd love to bring it to the App Store or to the Nintendo Switch or to the Oculus. And they start there and just say, what would you guys do? So, that's another case where we draw from those inspirations, but we may apply it to a brand like Transformers or to a brand like Craig of the Creek with Cartoon Network. We did some games for them recently. So it kind of can come from both angles. Obviously, if we're making something original, it's on us to come up with what those mechanics are. But if we're connecting to a brand that people already love, there's certain things that I'm just not allowed to do with Optimus Prime, to keep it on brand. So sometimes that you might reclassify it not as inspiration, but guidelines. But those can give us a head start in coming up with a great game experience.
That's awesome. Okay. And you've talked a couple times about, kind of like growing up in the 80s and like, like memory of like games and stuff like that. It sparked my interest. Now I wonder like, what are some of those memories for you of games? Because like I definitely have some too. Big up 80s kids playing Nintendo and stuff. Yeah, I feel like there's plenty of those memories that come to my mind. But yeah, what's something that kind of really sparks for you?
Probably the one that was the most impactful was the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. It's been re-released so many times. I think even present day, you can download it on the Switch just to experience that very first one. And obviously Legend of Zelda is a massive franchise that's had multiple releases. But that very first one, I was maybe 6 or 7. And it was kind of complicated. Like there wasn't the tutorialization and instruction that there is today. Like you kind of had to go figure things out for yourself. And as like a 6 or 7 year old kid, like that was pretty daunting, but also a lot of fun. So I remember getting like that, going through that first labyrinth, getting that first, Triforce, and feeling like absolutely exhausted. Like, oh my God, that was like tough. But man, that was probably one of those memories that like stuck with me and said, I want to keep doing this forever. I want to create these experiences for other people forever.
That's awesome. I feel like I'm in, a place where, now I reflect on those games and I want to pass that on to like my kids too, because I feel like, making memories with video games. I know obviously, sometimes when we were kids, our parents would look at that and be like, oh, they're just playing a bunch of video games. But now I feel like it's a totally different connection to it. And it's very unique and very cool. But I will say that I wasn't on that side specifically with my parents always looking at like, oh, why are you playing video games? My dad would play with me, and like actually he would stay up a lot later, and he would play till like 4 a.m. and then leave it on pause for me to pick up where he left off. So anyway, I have very good memories about like playing games, the original Batman, and the music, how indelibly implanted it is in my memory. Everything from obviously the original Mario, but definitely Zelda, Batman. Music is just a huge part of it too. So that's neat to hear about that. Moving on to like, I guess your lessons and things that you've learned over time. Is there anything that you can maybe as you have these, client relationships with studios and these partnerships, what can you say about client relationships that you've learned through your experiences?
Oh man, I'm sure there's probably 100 lessons, right? You probably have some of your own. Some of them you can articulate quite quickly, and some of them are just like kind of buried in instinct, or kind of developed, I guess, from instinct into just practice. But one thing, and we have this philosophy at Graphite as a whole, but getting a project, getting an opportunity, getting a chance to work with, say, like Cartoon Network, we used to really kind of pine for those opportunities and really, sell pretty hard to try and get those. And then we'd get it and we'd work really hard at it. And then it just kind of seemed like, oh, well, that was done. And we changed our philosophy a couple of years ago to think like, when we're considering client relationships, don't think of like the first project as the finish line. Like, oh, we got to get this thing released and then we're done. We changed our philosophy to look at the third project as the finish line. That way when we get that first project, when we launch that first game for a company like Cartoon, that's like kind of the starting point, right? That's the first act of our story. And we want to go on and get the second and the third, because on that second one, on that third one, that's really where we can build our internal efficiencies. And plainly speaking, from a business perspective, that's where our real profit comes from, because we're more efficient. We understand the client's needs and some of their, different quirks here and there. So by that third project, that's really where both Graphite and the partner can truly benefit. We do a better job. We can do it for a more optimized cost structure. And we ultimately benefit from it financially as well, just because we're wasting less time trying to figure out the experience. So that's one of the biggest things that shifted for us on the work for hire side and trying to get new projects, is to think of every potential relationship as like a 3-project deal.
Yeah. That's good to know, especially when thinking about billing and fee structure. And obviously, like at the end of the day, obviously this is fun, but you want to make sure that you can make money and thrive as an agency. How do you guys charge for your projects to these clients? Is this something where, you build like a big project budget, ongoing retainers? Like, yeah, what's sort of the structure that you guys use?
So some of both. It hasn't always been this way. Some of this is quite new. But when we first started as a game development studio, it was build out a scope doc, figure out most of the features, take a wild guess at how long those are going to take, usually guess wrong, and then, give some, kind of big price tag for it. Let's just say $100 to make a game. And then by, that last month, you've got maybe $10, $12 left of that budget. And you really kind of start getting anxious and saying, oh, we've got to hurry this thing up. We've got to, let's not fix these bugs. We got to at least make a couple of bucks to feed the team, kind of thing. And so for the first maybe 10 years of Graphite Labs existence, including the previous company that we founded before Graphite, that's kind of how we worked, is we do our best to kind of make those guesses. So with that kind of previous lesson in mind, if we made 3 games, we'd get better at kind of quoting the third game because we knew kind of what it took to do game 1 and 2. Present day, though, we do things a little bit differently. There's more value now in getting a game out early because you can use data to really assess how the game's performing, and you don't have to guess as much. You can use complicated analytics suites to see how your gamers are moving through your games. And long story short, we can release faster and then support over a longer period of time versus trying to just guess and bundle everything up in that first release. So present day, it might look like, we still do a little bit of that guessing to figure out what our first release has to look like. And we'll put a single price on that effort, right? An initial budget. But then we'll follow up with sometimes 3, 6, 12 months of support where we are changing the game, improving the game. And sometimes that support is actually a bigger budget than the initial development. So it's really evolved how we price things initially and how our team plans to, support the game long term. So those support contracts are a big part of our revenue now.
Yeah. Knowing that you are doing that kind of ongoing support and, and working with these, kind of like game or these, companies intimately, in the release of these games, where are maybe some of the, where are you working with them in like, the revenue chain? Are they actually kind of selling and charging for the game and then just paying, for your service secondarily? Do they kind of front load that? I'm just curious is like, how that actually works. Or do they get that funded and then basically make money on the back end with all the sales? And is that the only way it works?
So you've got it pretty close to correct. It's not always it doesn't always work that way, but how we frequently work is we will assign, again, just using a fictitious budget. Let's say we got $1,000 this time. We got a nice upgrade from the $100. But let's say the first version of that game is just a prototype. And we might say, okay, for that prototype, we'll take 1/10 of that budget. And that's what we get paid when we clear that prototype approval. And then we do, another couple of features. So it's kind of milestone based. And that's kind of how we phrase it, at least within our world and industry, is we set those milestones when we sign the contract. Prototype here, vertical slice there, alpha milestone here, release there. And we just take a portion of the budget and say, okay, based on how much time we think it'll require or the staff contributions at the time, let's put $100 here and put 200 there and 5 on the very end or something like that.
Yeah. That's a great lesson though, like breaking down that project and like trying to understand its parts and pieces a little more intimately so that you can sort of at least, attempt to budget better for the different areas in which you're going to appropriate that to. I think that's super, super helpful. And I definitely know how that sounds different than obviously, when you approached it at the beginning, it was like, hey, let's put a big budget here and hope and pray for the best. And I certainly, I know how that goes on the other end of it. Well, it sounds like we had a conversation directly before we actually started talking and getting into the meat of the podcast. And it was about you guys having potentially one of your own releases coming up. And my question to you was actually really going to be, do you ever put out your own video games? And you were like, funny you say that. And so I'll let you, give the details.
Jump into it. Yeah, it's just a happy coincidence here that we do a lot of work for hire for others, as you mentioned. I mean, these are, everyone from Disney to, Nickelodeon to Atari. And incidentally enough, this morning, our next original property was announced via IGN that Atari has actually agreed to publish an original title crafted, right here in St. Louis from Graphite Lab and our partners, Joystick Games. And this game, it's called Combinera. And literally just a couple hours ago, IGN posted the announcement from Atari. And it's an absolutely kind of just, pinch me moment, because in all of our experience, while we have released some of our own original games in years past, we've never had the support, attention, or commitment from a publisher. And a publisher's role in this whole experience, typically is to help with the marketing, the press, the promotion, the outreach, which is going on right now. But it's, not always the case that a publisher will invest in the development of a game like Atari has here. So as a budding entrepreneur and a game developer, to have someone from the outside invest in game development right here in St. Louis, to me, is very fulfilling.
That's
And
wonderful. Congrats, really. Honestly,
thank,
that is super cool. It's cool for you guys, the company, and it's also as you mentioned, for St. Louis, it's cool for the city too. We want more. As I joke that we're like, oh yeah, the hub, Missouri
sure.
of all video game development. I would love for our city to obviously grow their presence. I'm sure you even more so. So I mean, that is wonderful. That's great to hear.
Thanks.
Yeah. But this is a big moment. You've reached this moment to where now obviously you're getting, that kind of investment.
Mhm.
And that is wonderful. But are there, maybe any, pointers or experiences you can give to getting to maybe not only that point, but getting to the point and obviously working for brands like, and these organizations like Disney and Nickelodeon, those are huge names. So yeah, any kind of pointers you can give for getting to that point?
Well, I've been doing this a little while, and we built some of those relationships over time. But really, it was, I guess, kind of two parts. But a lot of it was just persistence of reaching out to those organizations with ideas. You have to be, in our experience, proactive and reaching out to them, saying, "Here's what we'd like to do with this property," or "Here's an idea we have. Are you interested?" To sit back and say, "Oh, they'll find us," is not going to happen in our experience. Even when we had a good portfolio of previous, let's say, mass market kids product, we worked with Disney and Nickelodeon and Hasbro, frequently. You know, when it came time to think about a new platform or a new brand or a new property, we always had to be proactive in going out and letting them know we're interested, letting them know we're available, letting them know we had new experience that, they may want to take advantage of. So no matter what success we have or anything else, it's always a proactive obligation on our part to reach out to these groups and make sure that we're kind of pushing that forward. Yeah.
Cool. And with that, with that sort of outreach, is that really just kind of like, here's the games that we're working on, here's things that we're doing, or is it actually kind of bringing them opportunities?
It can be some of both. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
great.
yeah, some of both. So there's been a few, like for this particular one that we're, announcing today. This was a concept that, was kind of conceived here in St. Louis. We said, hey, Graphite kind of took this concept under its wing and said, hey, we think this really has a shot at being published. And the concept creators, they go by the handle Joystick Games. One part of that kind of Joystick Games label was an employee of Graphite Lab at the time, and they were just coming up with concepts during these game jams or these kind of, like, you probably know, hackathons, things like that. I saw this and I said, I think this has potential. Let's kind of bring this to some of our partners. And so we actually went to Atari and said, you got to look at this thing. You got to look at this game. We think it has a lot of Atari DNA in it. It's very arcade-like. It's got this kind of minimalist aesthetic. What do you think? So we were proactive in reaching out to them and saying, we think this is a good fit for Atari. What do you say?
It's a good note for kind of making it happen, just as much as obviously this was, nice and wonderful for them to make the investment. Obviously,
Yeah,
it was on you to make that happen. And that's cool
sure.
that came to fruition. Other than this, are there other big breaks that you can feel like, that you're like, ooh, wow, when this hit, it was a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're not going to sound like very cool. When we were first starting our company, after the tycoon stuff, kind of didn't pan out very well. We had an opportunity to work with Nickelodeon, but it wasn't on any like cool Nick cartoons that we would have, been, watching ourselves at the time or anything. It was actually with some of their junior brands. So the first big break we got was developing Dora the Explorer for the Game Boy Advance, which, even when we got the opportunity, we were like, seriously, we're going to make like Dora games? Like, we're all like 22, 23-year-old guys playing Call of Duty and like God of War. Like, why would they trust us with this, 5-year-old kids brand? None of us even had kids at the time. Like, it was a very odd kind of combo. But getting that game, and we didn't know, like Dora was like $1 billion brand at the time. Like we were basically being given a golden key. And so we're like, all right, we'll make this thing. And in making that, they're like, you guys did such a great job. Here's another brand and another brand. And we ended up doing like 7 or 8 from the Nick Jr. line. And these things were like crushing hundreds of thousands of copies. One of the Dora games was our first 1 million unit seller. Like it was kind of ridiculous. So I have a lot to thank Dora the Explorer for in my career. And we ended up then, of course, a lot of us having kids and seeing them play those games was way more fulfilling and gave it a higher purpose. But yeah, I mean, getting those projects was a pretty big break for us. I mean, it allowed us to grow our team, develop our own technology, and start to develop a real niche and skill set for making licensed properties and mass market games.
Yeah, definitely. You never thought you would adore that as much as you did. Sorry, I have to have one bad pun per episode. That's rule. But that is great. And yeah, what a weird thing to make it happen. But I mean, still, you're right. At when that happened, and the prominence of that show, and obviously the amount of kids that were involved in it, watched it. I'm sure it was a big opportunity. That's really cool for ones that maybe you haven't done yet, but you just have this, just burning desire to hopefully, work with or work for someday. Yeah. Who's like your white whale?
Oh man. There's an old franchise. You might remember this one. It was an early NES release called Kid Icarus.
Oh yeah.
All right. So Kid Icarus was made by the same team that made Metroid. Metroid, obviously massive brand. Kid Icarus is pretty well known by gamers of our age and from our era. And it's been remade or kind of reimagined once or twice, but I feel like it hasn't really been given the respect that kind of like classic mythology can kind of draw out. So I've always thought Kid Icarus deserves another shot from an external indie team that can come at it with kind of this like, hopeful nostalgia and kind of see it, possibly in a different light, but maybe someday.
Yeah, it's maybe even a really good time. The Marvel Universe, Eternals, Icarus, there maybe we're calling it out into the ether, and so hopefully something will actually come of it. But that is cool. It's so funny you mentioned those games. I was thinking about, do you remember Adventure Island?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the wacky way his feet moved and stuff in the game, and then anyway, just what a weird game, but I loved that game.
It's kind of slippery on the feet, right? Yeah, yeah.
You wouldn't think that would be the terrain of the island, but it apparently was.
He's slipping all around on the grass. Got a skateboard, put on a helmet, do his little extra jumps.
Yeah, totally.
Good music. That's a good one. I like that. That'd be a great one.
Yeah, I did. For some reason, it struck me the other day. I was like, man, I really want to play that. So, well, where do you see gaming heading in the future? Like, I know that, you had mentioned Oculus. Obviously, that touches on VR. And then you've done augmented reality stuff. I know you haven't been able to kind of speak to that, but as far as your exposure, obviously more deeply within the game, realm. Where do you see things going?
Well, so for the last couple of years, games haven't changed so much on the front end as they have on the back end. Like the integration of data and complicated analytics and general like data analysis has changed the way games get designed in the last 10 years. But thinking about it more on the front end or in terms of mechanics, and like to get an evolution there, you almost need the mechanics to change, the inputs to change. So think back like 10 years ago, maybe 12, when the Nintendo Wii came out. Motion controls changed things up for quite a while. You had games like, Wii Sports that took bowling and made it just a little bit more fun for a while. And then you got Guitar Hero with all of its apparatus and stuff connected. And then the Kinect and PlayStation Move. And you saw this kind of like ripple effect for, a good decade of, motion-enabled games going around for a while. If all we do is just kind of make new controller, like new DualShock 12 or whatever, like it's not really going to change how gamers think about the games. It's just going to be more buttons and controllers. So there'll still be some like new stuff on the front end, but it's just going to be like, more game ideas. If we want an evolution, I think the inputs will have to change. And that's what's got me kind of excited about Oculus and VR right now. And VR has been around for a while, but what makes Oculus interesting is, they had a pretty massive holiday season. The numbers aren't posted, but from kind of some simple assessments on, from I guess a couple different angles, it looks like they had a pretty good Christmas. And that might mean that, the Oculus store, the Oculus attention, and the gamers on Oculus will grow over this year. So that's something I've got my eye on, that I think as VR becomes a little bit more mainstream, as we start to have more households with a VR headset, in them via Oculus, that's pretty exciting. And then putting on the headset and using their controllers is a different way to play, right? It feels different than buttons and joysticks. So that's got me pretty excited. I think it will add to the industry. I don't think it's going to like take over, and it's not going to pull away the PS5 crowd to go play on Oculus every day or anything, but it'll add to it in I think a creative way that'll get gamers thinking about games in a different way. So that, and you see a lot of energy around the blockchain discussion and things like that, which again, I think it might add to. I don't think it's going to completely consume or radicalize how we play games, but it'll add to it for sure.
For sure. Yeah. As an Oculus fan myself, I definitely agree with maybe not necessarily taking away from that core group of like Xbox and like PS5, kind of users. Yeah. But at the same time, I definitely see it augmenting it. And I completely agree on that front. I myself love it because the interaction style is different. I never got amazingly good at first person shooters, but I can absolutely do really well in Super Hot. But I feel and I'm like, oh, this game is awesome. It feels really rewarding to play, and it's just so immersive. So yeah, I am definitely I'm in for all the Oculus games and the things they come up with for it. I know that even Super Hot started on PSVR and just had a kind of 2D setting as well. But anyway, really looking forward to all the stuff that occurs there, and certainly blockchain games, that is fascinating. I see them popping up all over the place.
Sure.
And everybody's like, oh, you should totally play. Everybody, I feel like
yeah, we'll see how those things evolve. One thing that I've learned through my history is, it's quick for something to kind of catch attention, but it takes a long time to really kind of evolve through those different phases. I remember reading articles, goodness, in like 2002 and 3 saying VR takeover is right around the corner. So I've always been a little bit more I wouldn't say pessimistic, but when somebody asks me, how long do you think it'll take for XYZ system to take over? And it takes a pretty long time. Look at the iPhone coming out to try and actually really, make cell phones, put cell phones in everybody's pocket. BlackBerry had been making good ground prior to that, but, it took a while for just basically everybody to have a touchscreen smartphone. So, it takes time. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. So whether it's VR, blockchain gaming, or the next thing after that, it takes a little while for those to really kind of reach through and kind of take over as a new normal.
For sure. All right. Well, now I have to hit you with the penultimate question.
Sure.
Yeah, and really just want to figure out what is the best game you've played in the last year?
Oh man, the best game I've played in the last year.
Everything hinges on this.
my entire brain is just shuffling through every single store page or my Steam library. I'm like, oh, did I play that this year? Something that kind of surprised me this year was it's not even a new release, but a game called Forager. Forager, you can play it on any console and probably PC too, but imagine a kind of a crafting kind of survival game, but the landscape is in these really small, almost we'll call them Lego brick sized chunks, maybe a little bit bigger than a Lego brick, but it's a very it's a very visually cute. It's very pixelated. It's got that old school pixel aesthetic. It's very, audibly, it's very quirky and charming. But essentially you craft just like you would in Minecraft, chop down a tree, get the logs, turn the logs into a better, pickaxe, and away you go. But if you call it a minimalist crafting and survival game. I think it's a pretty good kind of description of it. And it was recommended to me and like, oh yeah, it's a pretty cool game. And I downloaded it on Game Pass. And after playing it for like 45 minutes, I'm like, maybe I am kind of into this thing. And I played it for quite a while. But yeah, just very kind of casual, almost kind of gets into a bit of like an idle gameplay. Once you get far enough along, it's just like, I got to go check my furnace and make sure my iron is ready and, that kind of thing. So
a Sims oriented, kind of, yeah, I got to do the thing in the game. Oh, that's cool.
Kind of your daily chores of, foraging and crafting and other stuff like that. Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
That sounds great. Awesome. Well, Matt, I have to tell you, number one, I feel like all the questions you answered would be really helpful for people who are interested in like, getting into this universe of, kind of games, game development. And certainly I want to tell you congratulations on all the success you've had, certainly on the new news with Atari. That is wonderful. Really happy to hear that for you guys. And definitely it was good to have you on and like do this podcast with you. So I really want to say, thank you for joining us and really good luck for all the things that may come in the future here.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Definitely. Have a good one.